Jason Todd, the second Robin, famed for being beaten to death by a crowbar by the Joker. Even though technically it was the explosion that killed him, but that just doesn't hit the same. This Robin's death would go on to have ripple effects on not just Batman, but the Batman mythos as a whole. For a time, it was even considered one of the permanent comic book deaths. This before Jason Todd's resurrection in 2005 and the Under the Hood story arc, revealing that not only was he alive, but he had taken on the name of Red Hood. And from there he would range from outright bitter, unhinged, unstable, to bit of a black sheep, seeking redemption, but always there is this moment defining him. Also, never forget that he got brought back to life because Superboy Prime punched a wall. And even though it could be argued that, like some of the other Robins, he's gotten a bit stuck in his forever story, most were happy he returned. Though an argument could be made for him staying dead, but that's not the point of this video. Today we're going to be looking at the fact that some feel he should never have died in the first place, and the story that would have led to him staying alive. Jason Todd died in 1988 in the Death in the Family storyline. I'm trying to hold it so I don't blind you with it. It's so reflective. His ultimate fate was shown in issue 428. The arc was written by Jim Starlin, with art by Jim Aparo, inks Mike DiCarlo, and colors Adrian Roy. And it was part of a larger story, not just in canon, but outside of it. There was lots of discussion about Jason and the Jason problem. For this, we need to get into a bit of infamous fandom lore. Some of it that many people know, and then we're going to get a bit deeper. A fact that many know is that Jason Todd's death was decided by fan vote, over the phone. And the vote was extremely close, within 72 votes. Now, comic companies were no strangers to votes for things happening in stories, but it's usually for little things like costumes or hair, and sometimes they would even just ignore the results. Looking at you, new hairstyle for Lois Lane contest. The secret is that everybody voted for the old hairstyle. But when it comes to something so large, the death of a character, it was more controversial. And there were lots of different opinions about Jason at the time, and a lot of this came about because Jason had changed over the years. He had been introduced shortly before Crisis on Infinite Earths, and after that crisis, his origin was changed, as was his personality a little bit, and not everybody took to it. However, since there was a vote, there were two versions of the original story. One where he lived and one where he died. And they were both actually complete. So there was a version out there where Jason didn't die. And some of the pages have trickled out throughout the years. Usually it's just the panel saying that he lives. Like I have it in the back of this one. He's alive. Look at how happy Batman is. Not today. However, the full issue with how the story would have gone wasn't released until 2023, where DC decided to release a faux simile edition with a very similar cover, but the text was changed. Nice pun. And that version, the original panels were utilized. So fans who voted for Jason to live, or who are just curious about it, can see how it would have played out. This is seemingly because it's been 35 years since a Death in the Family, although it also feels a bit random, and like many of these things, a bit like a cash grab. But it's one of the more interesting ones. It is a treat, I suppose, for those who voted for him to live, or just those who were annoyed by the concept of the vote or how it went down, because rumors have swirled for years that it was not a fair vote, not only an implementation based on who could vote and where, but also the idea that someone was just redialing over and over and over again. That's floated around there for a long time. The number of votes was 5,343 to kill him versus 271 votes to keep him alive. Some just felt the whole thing is just unfair. It didn't have good vibes. So now the whole alternate story has been released, and it doesn't make that much of a difference. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics. Let's take a look at what could have been, how it came about, and why, with the benefit of honestly some hindsight bias, it feels like the original 428 worked out pretty well in the long run. Maybe it's even better. Today we all get to be Captain Hindsight. Jason Todd debuted in Batman 357 in 1983, created by Jerry Conway and Don Newton. And he was a fair bit different than the Jason who would die. This Jason was ginger. That wasn't the only difference. He was created explicitly to replace Dick Grayson as Robin, because Dick had largely grown out of the role, especially now that he was in Titans and being presented as a leader. But fans and creators still enjoyed and wanted to capture that Cape Crusader Boy Wonder dynamic duo. So Jason was brought in to eventually replace Dick as Robin, and over time Dick would move on to being Nightwing. And they took their time with Jason. It was in Batman 366 that he dyed his hair and went out as Robin, though there'd been attempts by him before. However, Jason was a lot like Dick, down to his backstory. He had two acrobat parents. He worked in the circus. His parents had been inspired by the Flying Graysons, and so they were the Flying Todds. And guess what? They died killed by a criminal. In this case, they were murdered by Killer Croc, and so Jason was an orphan. Interestingly enough, Dick wanted to adopt him at first, but he can start his orphan collection some other time. Bruce Wayne, probably. It would be Bruce who took Jason in. Jason had already learned that both his mentors were superheroes, and he would seek to prove himself worthy to be one too, specifically Robin. He had that kind of gumption. He really really wanted to do good. And he would eventually get approval from both Bruce and Dick to take on the Robin mantle. It's a really nice sequence where Dick literally passes him the mantle, so there's no hard feelings. Jason also dyed his hair black to look more like Robin, which would get him to all kinds of trouble when people with beef with Dick would take it out on him, like Batman 368, where he also got that acceptance. It was his first outing in his own proper Robin costume, and he nearly got beaten to death by Crazy Quilt. In terms of why they were so similar, O'Neill, as mentioned the Batman group editor at the time, stated, "I think they thought we've got to have a Robin in the series, so let's go with the tried and true. This Robin has worked for so many years, so let's do him again." From a hindsight perspective, this is very interesting. As someone who came to this version of Jason later, by the time I was reading this version of Jason, Jason had been resurrected. Pre-crisis Jason reads as nearly indistinguishable from Dick. In certain Batman stories, unless someone said his name, sometimes you could assume he just was Dick. There were some differences, and he did have some unique pathos of initially struggling to deal with some imposter syndrome, but it wasn't the focus, and similarities between him and Dick were leaned into, rather than a focus on things that could have made this Jason stand out, because those things were there. So it's interesting to look at the fact that that was the intention, that that's what they were going for. He was just created to fill the original role. And while he does that, it's not as interesting as what Jason would become when they started to play with and change his personality. At least that's how it read to me, coming from an era where there are already multiple Robins, all with different personalities. I just bring that up because how and when you come to the comics and the characters can very much influence how you read them and be part of the opinions that you form on them, because I've also talked to people in the comments, for example, who love pre-Crisis Jason. Now, Jason would be revamped in a big way post-Crisis on Infinite Earths, and given the backstory he is now known for, the stealing tires off the Batmobile story, he would come to have that personality that was a bit angrier, a bit more rebellious, a bit more volatile. He would be given a more troubled backstory that would be glimpsed more and more the more he was utilized. But at the start, we saw him robbing Batman in Batman 408 in 1987. And it was something that amused Batman. It really made Jason different, despite now coming out the gate looking like a Dick clone. However, this new origin did not include Dick's approval. In fact, Dick and Bruce had now had a more fraught transition in Dick leaving the role as Robin. And the way Bruce just gives his identity to Jason was pretty callous. It's a nice moment for Jason and Bruce, but it's not a great moment for Dick. And compared to the previous send-off where everybody was happy and enthusiastic, it definitely doesn't come across as well. It makes Batman just seem like he's giving something away that isn't his to give. Dick was a beloved character and it didn't sit right with everyone. And it was those who complained who ended up being listened to. Denny O'Neill stated, "The fans did hate him. I don't know if it was fan craziness, maybe they saw him as usurping Dick Grayson's position. Some of the mail response indicated that this was at least on some people's minds." It was also said that people didn't like Jason because he was so different from Dick, because he was rebellious, because he wasn't that good boy. People really did have an attachment to that earlier dynamic, and some weren't willing to give this new one a chance. And one of the people who disliked Jason was Jim Starlin, the writer of Batman during the era when Jason would be revamped. So O'Neill would have him lean into not liking him and have him add those things to the story, and that's where you get a lot more of Jason's negative traits. I would argue those are the very things that make Jason more interesting, but they're born of the creator not liking him, trying to make him seem more unlikable, so that's purposeful. Looking back, making Jason darker, more combative, more rebellious, it only helped his character. It made him stand out. And you would have iconic stories that are still remembered to this day, like the one where Jason probably killed a guy, or at the very least didn't save him. That's meant to be a horrific moment of proof that Jason isn't meant to be Robin. And while it may be, it's also incredibly interesting. Now, I was not there during this era, so I do not know the vibe firsthand. I can only read letters and talk to people, so if you were there, I want to hear from you. How are you feeling about Jason? What was the overall tone? Did you write an angry letter? If so, do you still have it? You know I'd love to read it. Here's a story I found from that era. So take it with a grain of salt. There is one point where DC put out a suggestion box because they wanted to do a story surrounding HIV and AIDS because it was such an important cultural issue at the time. And allegedly, Starlin just filled the box with suggestions on how to kill Jason. Just different ways. I
don't get it.
It just gives a different vibe to how brutally he was killed. Now, at the same time, DC was also casting about to boost sales. And all of this would eventually seal Jason's fate. Denny O'Neill decided to pitch a big contest to get some reader engagement. He pitched it to then DC Comics president Jeanette Kahn. And he said that it had to be something big, stating, "We didn't want to waste it on anything minor, whether Firestorm's boots should be red or yellow. This had to be important, life or death stuff." The logical candidate was Jason, because we had reason to believe that he wasn't that popular anyway. It was a big enough stunt that we couldn't do it with a minor character. What's funny is that when the vote would actually occur, Anil would vote for Jason to live. Not because he liked him, but because he felt that him dying would make his job as editor more difficult. But at the same time, he felt there was a good chance that Jason would die. Again, not because people disliked him, but because he felt that fans would want to see if DC would go through with it. It's all so fascinating. The minutia. In my opinion, the stories leading up to Jason's death are some of the most interesting for him. He was on a darker trajectory. Batman was wondering if he'd made a mistake, despite having left KG Beast to die in the first arc Starlin took over in. But we'll ignore that cognitive dissonance. He was trying the same techniques he had with Dick, trying to give him an outlet for his rage and a purpose, and it just wasn't working. But all those questions as to where that would lead were cut off with a death in the family, or rather they were pushed in a different direction. Another thing that needs to be noted here is that since the origin change, it had been awkward in Batman and Detective Comics as to how Jason was portrayed, specifically in Detective Comics. Some of the detective stories still had the OG Jason origin vibes, and this was happening while Batman was laying out this new origin. It had New 52 vibes before the New 52. In the New 52, there are all these memos and stuff that didn't get sent, and so there would be different continuities between books. So in this period in the 80s, in order to combat this, Detective Comics just stopped using Jason, to the point where his death didn't even come up until 11 months after it happened in the Batman comics, which also gave the whole outing an odd vibe. But the results were in. Jason was dead, Batman mourned, and he backhanded Dick across the face. The universe would move on, and Jason's death would become a cautionary tale. His costume a solemn memorial in the Batcave. His presence hanging over Bruce and the Bat family, and just everything that had happened to him would be instrumental in how they chose to introduce Tim, who would become for a time quite the powerhouse of a Robin. Never forget how popular Tim was for a time. But back to Jason, what if the vote had gone another way? For that, we need to look at the Faux Simile edition. It's the exact same story except for a few key pages, and there are some differences in the narration boxes. Some things are removed. So you're not getting that much of a different experience. It's not radically different, which makes sense seeing as how you don't want to put too much extra work onto the creative staff. For those who haven't read this arc, some cliff notes. Jason had gone off on his own after being taken off Robin duties for jumping the gun attacking a child pornography ring. It just made him so angry and he couldn't listen to Batman. This was coming off of a bunch of other incidents, so Bruce decided that he was too unstable to keep doing the job. While out and about in his old neighborhood, Jason learned some details about his history, his parentage. The person he thought was his mother was not his biological mother, and his biological mother may still be alive. And so he sets out to seek her out. He ends up narrowing it down to 3 people and a couple of locations, which then brings him back into contact with Batman, who's running his own investigation on these nuclear missiles and the Joker, and so they end up coming back together to investigate. Cliff notes, we're mostly focusing on the Jason stuff. Jason finds his mom, she's an aid worker, and all seems well. Happy reunion, but actually she has a shady past and a connection with the Joker, and she's feeding him medical supplies. She is being blackmailed, but also she does throw Jason under the bus. She gives him to the Joker. This is the arc, by the way, that ends with the Joker being a diplomat. That's not what people tend to remember, though. Jason's mom is not a good person. She was embezzling from the agency, and as mentioned, she gives Jason up in the hopes that it'll help her cover. It's a devastating move. Jason's final moments are just horrific. He's betrayed by the mother that he had just found and who he thought loved him. He's beaten within an inch of his life by one of his arch enemies. He's not in a good position with Batman, his mentor, his role as Robin. It's a lot. And then the building explodes, and that's our lead up to 428. So all that before 427, 426 things. Now the original issue starts with Batman recalling his history with Jason as he searches for him amidst the rubble. It's a heartfelt examination of Bruce's fondness for Jason, his desire to help him, his slow realization that maybe making him Robin wasn't the way to do that. Although a lot of that is blamed on Jason himself.
But right from the start there was trouble. This new Robin came with an overload of emotional luggage.
Yeah, who does Jason think he is, having a hard time managing his emotional trauma? He comes with so much emotional luggage. Unlike Bruce or Dick, they had no emotional luggage. You can see that little bias against Jason, it's bleeding through. It's so interesting. Back to the recap, because this issue recaps what happened leading up to it, which makes sense because based on all the buzz surrounding this, it makes sense that some people might just show up for this issue who hadn't been reading for a while. Which, sidebar, what a brutal cover of a battered teen dying. It's effective, but again, it's a lot. Although, if that was the goal, dark and cynical, achieved. We learn learn that Jason threw himself in front of his mother to try and save her, and as she dies, she says he was a good boy. It's on the bottom of page 9 that the divergence starts. In the published story, The Death, there's narration boxes as Bruce checks Jason's body and finds that he is dead. And we have the famous panel of him lifting the broken and bruised Jason from the wreckage. In Robin Lives, we get a shocked Batman as he realizes that Robin is alive. And then we get some additional panels of him being rushed to the hospital. But as much as possible was kept the same. There were just little dialogue changes, little boxes removed or things not mentioned until we get to the funeral. In Robin Lives, it's just for Jason's mother. And instead of the mourning Bruce pages, we get Bruce going to visit Jason, who's in a coma. So essentially, they were going to stop using him either way. Robin Lives may call to mind the idea that he's gonna go on and keep being Robin, but really it's Robin's in a coma. He's going to lay there and they're probably going to try and memory hole him, or at least they may have if this is the direction they had gone in. This coma does seem like it would have led to a classic phasing out and maybe bringing back at some point, or perhaps having him wake up and not remember anything, amnesia plot, or have him decide that he shouldn't be Robin after all. Just many ways to get him out if they wanted to. That's conjecture, but it's plausible. One interesting change is that in both Batman withdraws into himself, but in Robin Lives it's from Dick, while in the original issue it's from Alfred, and he refuses to get in touch with Dick. He'll backhand him later. The rest of the issue plays out the same way. Superman shows up to let Bruce know that the new ambassador of Iran is the Joker, so Batman can't touch him. So even though Jason's death is the thing this arc is remembered for, there's a bit of a hurry up, get him out of the way energy to it. They really try to minimize him, and the last issue of the arc he's not even in, because he's dead or in a coma, and that's how it would have gone. It's not a huge difference. But after reading both, I would contend that the death is stronger. Now, of course, some of this could be hindsight bias. We live in the world where Jason died, so we can only imagine how it would have gone had he been removed via coma. But it seems fair to speculate on the idea that the impact wouldn't have been quite the same. His death is so brutal, and that panel is so shocking, it sticks with you. It's a pivotal Batman moment, and a key moment for Jason. It calls so much into question about the nature of Robin. And by making it a death, it doesn't allow the story to shift the blame to Jason as it's trying to do at points in the text. It's haunting, and it haunts Batman, as it should. As time would go on, more and more people would come to re-examine this version of Jason and just what had happened around his death, both inside the canon and outside of it. And some would start to come to the conclusion that it wasn't fair that he was killed off in such a way, or even if they didn't mind it, they felt that the assertions that he was a bad Robin were wrong. Or there was the idea that it was just an interesting and good story. The idea that maybe not everybody should be Robin, that this could be a mistake. His death, as mentioned, would influence how Tim Drake was introduced. A slower, more deliberate effort, where Tim was made to feel distinct from Dick, but Jason's death would hang over everything. Not only in how long it took Bruce to accept him, but also in the personality traits they chose to give Tim. They gave him some of that pre-crisis trying to ingratiate himself, but they also made him feel like he wasn't just a carbon copy of Dick. But they also didn't go with the whole rebellious and maybe over the edge thing. Jason's death was used to interrogate, does Batman need a Robin, and is it right for him to have one? And if so, how can he go about it? And then there was the resurrection, where Jason started off as a villain, which felt very in line with his past trajectory. But it also brought up the question, was it inevitable? Jason was positioned as Batman's failure, and that in and of itself was also important to the Batman universe. It was something else for Batman and the heroes to overcome, and for the reader to question. It allowed there to be a lot of sympathy around Jason, which many fans latched onto. It really made people feel passionately about Jason. And he still, to this day, has a very strong fan base, and many who are fans of the direction and of which he is redeemed. Though not everyone. Jason's death was a tragedy, and when he returned, they still managed to keep that tragic element, despite the wall punch. But now it was elevated to another level. Jason taking on the mantle of the man who killed him, if you go for that being the backstory of the Joker. Jason now being a walking reminder of what had happened. It strikes a nerve that wouldn't have been as impactful had he awakened from a coma. There's something about him pulling himself out of his own grave like a vampire that's different than just waking up in a hospital. Not that they're not both serious, but you know, narrative drama. In short, people were really able to make something out of Jason's death and work with it, partially spurred on by the injustice of it, or some of the threads that storyline never answered. Coma, it just seems a bit obvious. The fact that they were shelving him and trying to get him out of the way. It's unclear if he would have gotten the same attention or development or the same pathos if that was the route that had been gone down. Sometimes stories land in such a way that they become central to a character's history, and that's the case with Jason's death. Especially since Robin Lives doesn't see Jason still acting as Robin. So all of those questions about whether Bruce could harness his rage, or whether he was already on a path to villainy, they're kind of thrown aside for soap opera coma. Not that I don't love a good soap opera coma. but not for Jason. But who knows, maybe people would have been just as salty about that coma, and he would have woken up and become Red Hood anyway, or something else. We can't know, we can only speculate, so let's do that, because it's fun. Reading the two side by side, there certainly feels like there's more love in the death version. Unsurprising, given how much the author hated him, and in general, to me it flowed better. Although again, I may just be more used to the death version. I'm curious which direction you like better. Would you have gone with Coma Jason? Do you prefer the version that ended up being published? Do you agree that Jason's death is an iconic and important storyline? How do you feel about him now that he's been resurrected? Should he have stayed dead? Those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I, as always, appreciate you taking some of your day spent discussing comics with me. There will be more vids coming soon, and I'll see you there. Bye-bye.